short. If you haven't signed up, please come up here and sign up if you wish to speak, or indicate if you don't even wish to speak. With that, members of the advisory committee, you received the agenda. If there are no additions or corrections, I would entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Have a motion, do I hear a second?
Sorry.
Have a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All, like sign. You also, in your packets, received, the meeting minutes of our January the 7th meeting. Hopefully you've taken the time to read over those. If there are no additions or corrections, I'd entertain a motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
Have a motion, do I hear a second?
Second.
Have a second. All those in favor, let it be known by saying aye.
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 Motion carries. At this time, I'll turn it over for a presentation of the adaptive management options for Blue Crab Plan Amendment 3 to the division. I'm not sure who's presenting.
That will be Robert Corbett and McLean Seward.
Let me just switch your spots.
No, you're good.
I need the notes. Will it reach this far?
Just come over here.
Sure. Good. All right, so first of all, I want to thank everybody for coming. Good evening, my name is Robert Corbett. I'm one of the division's Blue Crab leads based out of the city office. With me today is McLean Seward, the other Blue Crab lead based out of the Bloomington office. Today, we'll be discussing Amendment 3 adaptive management options and the division's preliminary recommendations for management changes in the blue crab fishery. Following this presentation. Absolutely. So I'm starting to lose my voice a little. But following this presentation, we'll be happy to answer any questions before you vote on advisory committee recommendations. Today's presentation will begin with a recap of our current timeline. Following this, we'll look at trends we've observed in the blue crab stock and revisit adaptive management framework as outlined in Amendment 3 of the Blue Crab Fisheries Management Plan. We'll then transition into a discussion of potential management strategies, examining the pros and cons of each before concluding the presentation with the division's preliminary recommendation. Once completed, we will be glad to take any questions and would appreciate your input before we vote on the advisory committee recommendations. To recap, a benchmark stock assessment was completed in 2018 and determined the blue crab stock was overfished and overfishing was occurring. Amendment 3 to the Blue Crab FMP was developed and adopted in response to the stock assessment results. At the May 2024 MFC business meeting, DMF presented results of the 2023 stock assessment update, terminal year 2022, and highlighted our concerns with the assessment results and the diagnostics. The primary concern was the drastic change in the reference points between the benchmark and the update. Due to this and other issues identified by peer reviewers, the 2023 stock assessment update will not be used for management purposes or to inform harvest reductions. We then continued our presentation discussing ongoing declining trends in the dependent and independent monitoring before outlining our plan to implement management changes through the Amendment 3 Adaptive Management Framework. In September, the division conducted outreach meetings with the Northern, the Southern, and the Shellfish Crustacean MFC advisory committees. Although public attendance was small, meetings provided solid input from crabbers on current stock conditions and thoughts on how to pursue management going forward. After the AC meetings, Lee's continued outreach and analysis and began drafting revisions to 3. At the August and November MFC meetings, the division updated the commission on our progress. Today, we will be presenting the draft revision and providing the division's preliminary recommendations. After today, the division may reevaluate the preliminary recommendations before bringing the final revision to the MFC in May for selection of management issues. Now, I do want to caveat this, that we did not present at this last MFC meeting. There is a possibility that the final vote may not be in May and we may push back into August. So I did want to state that before. So before we get into the current stock trends, I want to make a few notes about the benchmark stock assessment, the updated assessment, and why we aren't using the updated assessment to inform harvest reduction. These figures show the estimated spawners, recruits, and the fishing mortality from the benchmark stock assessment and the update. The benchmark is shown in orange and the update is in blue. In all cases, trends from the benchmark and the update match extremely well. Spawners and recruits are declining and fishing mortality remains high. This means the benchmark and the update are telling us the same thing, and that is the stock has continued to decline. The key difference between the benchmark and the update is the drastic change in the reference points. The figures on the top show the estimated spawners and fishing mortality from the benchmark stock assessment. The reference points are illustrated by the dashed and dotted lines. The threshold reference point is what we use to determine if the stock is overfished and if overfishing is occurring. As you can see in the 2016 stock assessment, the 2016 stock assessment was considered overfished and overfishing was occurring, but not by much. And it hadn't been occurring through the entire series. The figures on the bottom show the estimated spawners and fishing mortality from the updated stock assessment. On these figures, the threshold reference points is illustrated by the solid black line. Again, this is what we use to determine if the stock is overfished and if overfishing is occurring. As you can see, the reference points change drastically from the benchmark to the update, to the point where the stock status would be much worse than what was indicated by the benchmark stock assessment. And the results suggested the stock was always overfished and overfishing was always occurring. For these reasons, among others, and as peer reviewers recommended, the division agrees the stock assessment update should not be used to inform harvest reductions. So in summary, the benchmark stock assessment was completed in 2018 and determined the stock was overfished and overfishing was occurring as of 2016. In 2023, the assessment was updated with data through 2022. Although the trends of the update match closely to those of the benchmark, the resulting reference points exhibited significant and unexpected shifts. The reference points changed to the extent where the stock status would be much worse compared to the benchmark, to the point where the stock would have been overfished and overfishing would have been occurring throughout the entire time series. To note, if the updated stock assessment was used to inform harvest restrictions, we would need to see reductions of at least 45%, which would meet the statutorily requirement. This would be essentially the threshold. Target for the reduction would be 56% harvest reduction. I don't have a mouse anymore.
Get to the left.
To the left. Not scrolling anymore. That's not it. I'll go back down real fast. All right, so due to the magnitude and change in reference points, well, let me see. Due to the magnitude of change in the reference points, an external review of the assessment update was completed in late December of 2023. Reviewers identified the concerns with the model specifications and the results and strongly recommended resolving the issues before basing any management decisions on the assessment update. Suggestions provided by the reviewers can only be incorporated with a new benchmark stock assessment. Given the concerns identified by DMF and the external peer reviewers, the 2023 stock assessment update will not be used to inform harvest reductions. So even though the updated stock assessment is not being used to inform harvest reductions, the update still provides useful information about the ongoing trends we're observing. These figures show the data through 2022, the terminal year of the assessment, and date all the way back to 1995. The top figure in black illustrates the estimated number of recruits or juvenile crabs in the stock, and the bottom figure in blue illustrates the estimated number of spawning females in the stock. As you can see, both figures clearly indicate steady declines, with the declines in spawners closely following the declines in recruits. Both show the lowest estimates being in the later part of the time series, your 2021 and your 2022. The same declining trends in recruits and spawners abundance are also captured in our independent sampling. So, looking into some of the independent sampling, these figures show the abundance of both males and female blue crabs from our program 195 Pamlico Sound trawl survey. The figures on the left show recruit abundance, with the June survey shown on the top and the September survey shown on the bottom. The same applies for the figures on the right side of the screen, but for adult crabs. We consider adult crabs with a carapace width of 5 inches or larger, and recruit crabs to be less than 5 inches. Please note that the scale of the y-axis is different for the graphs on the right side of the screen versus those on the left. Although there are some minor spikes through the time series, males and females of both life stages show continued declines or continued low abundance through 2022, with some of the lowest values in the time series in recent years, which is indicative of a low overall population. Moving on, the overall decline in recruitment is further illustrated in these figures, which shows our males and female recruits from our program 120 juvenile trawl survey. Again, we're considering recruits as crabs less than 5 inches. Male recruits are on the top, female recruits are on the bottom. Both male and female recruits have seen steady declines through the time series, with the last 2 years being the lowest ever on record. Declines in recruits and spawners abundance estimated from our updated stock assessment are not only reflective in our fishery independent sampling, but are also reflected in the commercial landings. This figure shows the commercial landings of all blue crabs from 1994 through 2023. Landings of all blue crabs have declined since the record high of 67 million pounds back in '96. In 2022, the harvest level dropped to the lowest in the time series, only 9.5 million pounds. Also shown on these figures are the dates of important fishery management changes since the adoption of the original FMP in 1998. It's important to note that until the adoption of Amendment 2 revision and Amendment 3, there had been no management that would directly limit harvest of any significant extent, yet landings have continued to decline. In addition to declining harvest levels, we see similar declines in participation and number of trips. The blue bars here represent the number of participants that corresponds to the axis on the left. The orange line represents the number of blue crab trips, which corresponds to the axis on the right. Similar to the previous figures, dates for all important fishery management changes since the adoption of the original FMP in 1998 through the adoption of Amendment 3 in 2020 are indicated. 2023, North Carolina had less than 1/4 of the number of participants as we did back in '96 and '97. As for the number of trips, in 2023, North Carolina crabbers made slightly more than 1/5 of the number of trips recorded in '98. This figure shows the annual hard blue crab landings on the left axis and the number of trips on the right axis. Since 1994, landings have declined in similar patterns to the number of trips landing blue crabs. Now, we recognize that we are well aware that factors other than a struggling stock can lead to these decreased landings, decreased trips, and fewer participants. But the fact is, we are also at an all-time low in recruitment levels, which are being observed in our independent surveys, which in combination provide strong evidence that these landing declines are indicative of a low population. I'd also like to point out that the declines that we've seen in North Carolina's blue crab stock are not unique. Other states along the Atlantic coast have observed similar declines. In 2023, the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources released the status report for the South Carolina blue crab fishery. The report concluded that South Carolina blue crab stock has been in decline for nearly 2 decades and provided recommendations to preventing overharvesting, gradually reducing fishing pressure, preventing overexploitation, and strengthening enforcement capabilities. Shown here is a figure from that South Carolina report illustrating the coast-wide commercial landing declines. Likewise, reports from the Chesapeake Bay indicate that although blue crab stock is not depleted and overfishing is not occurring, juvenile abundance remains low. Precautionary management focusing in on protecting mature females and juveniles has been recommended for the Chesapeake Bay stock, and a benchmark stock assessment has begun to better understand the population. Adaptive management options discussed today intend to counteract the long-term declining trends we've observed in the independent programs, as well as the data collected from commercial landings. The Amendment 3 Adaptive Management Framework is prescriptive in how it can be used and the steps that must be taken. There's 2 key points I want to highlight. First, since we do not have an updated stock assessment we can use to inform harvest reductions, but all available information suggests that Amendment 3 management is not working as intended and is not projected to meet the sustainability requirement, the Adaptive Management Framework allows us to reevaluate and implementation of revised and/or new management. Second, it's important to note that since management changes would be implemented through the Adaptive Management Framework adopted in Amendment 3, any action the MFC pursues must be quantifiable. As a reminder, the benchmark stock assessment projections indicated a minimum harvest reduction of 0.4% was needed to end overfishing, and a minimum harvest reduction of 2.2% was needed to achieve sustainable harvest and rebuild the blue crab spawning stock within 10 years of the date of adoption, with a 50% probability of success, meeting the statutory requirement. Management adopted in Amendment 3 was estimated to reduce harvest by 2.4% with only a 50% probability of success. Projections indicated a 19.8% harvest reduction was needed to meet the female spawner abundance target with a 100% probability of success. Today, we're about halfway through the statutorily required building period with very little indication Amendment 3 management will meet rebuilding targets. Therefore, adaptive management will be used to implement options that rebuild the stock closer to the spawner abundance target and have a probability of success closer to 100%. All options examined are estimated to result in a greater than 10% harvest reduction, and the division's recommended options with a greater than 15% harvest reduction to increase the probability of success. So, potential management strategies to counteract the declining trends, which can be implemented through the Amendment 3 Adaptive Management Framework, include size limit changes, prohibiting crab trawling, season closures, and trip limits. Harvest reductions for each of these management options are quantifiable, so they meet the requirements of the Amendment 3 Adaptive Management Framework. We'll discuss the pros and cons of each of these options, providing the rationale for the division's preliminary recommendation. But before we get into these options, other management strategies suggested by stakeholders include pot limits, time limits, and increased regulation on shedding operations. Due to limited data on true effort and data that accurately characterizes shedding operations, harvest reductions from these options are not quantifiable, so they are not explored through the adaptive management. These options may be explored further during the next review of the Blue Crab FMP, which is currently set to occur in 2026. Another topic that we've heard constantly from stakeholders is that predation by blue catfish and other species has led to the decline in the blue crab population. Stakeholders have suggested that this predation is considered in the management of blue crabs and their species. Currently, we don't have the data needed to address these types of ecosystem-based managements, but I am pleased to announce that several projects are underway to better understand the effects of predation on the blue crab stock. I'll also note that currently we don't have the data necessarily to quantify recreational blue crab harvest, but it's generally assumed to be small. Currently, the recreational fishery is held to all the same restrictions as the commercial fishery, in addition to a limit of 50 crabs per person, 100 crabs per vessel per day. Any new management will be applied to the recreational fishery as well. All right, so the first option we're going to discuss today, size limits. Currently, the minimum size limit for blue crab harvest is 5-inch carapace width statewide. For this management strategy, we have two options. We could increase the minimum size limit, or we could implement a maximum size limit. As for the minimum size limit, harvest reductions may not be met by increasing the minimum size limit, as undersized crabs quickly grow to legal size and become susceptible to harvest. Crabbers will face higher labor costs due to increased culling efforts, or crabbers may need to invest in larger cull rings. Law enforcement will require updated measuring tools to be manufactured, verified, and distributed, which could delay enforcement if any new regulations are implemented quickly. Regional stock differences could lead to uneven harvest reductions, market price fluctuations, and economic uncertainty for crabbers. Additionally, maximum size limits alone will have minimal impacts on reducing harvest and would need to be combined with other measures such as increasing the minimum size limit, year restrictions, and/or season closures. This strategy is likely to be unpopular with crabbers, as larger crabs are often your most valuable. Since cull ring changes are unlikely to exclude larger crabs, crabbers will be burdened with the increased effort and time required to cull their catch, as oversized crabs will need to be identified and released. This strategy will be particularly burdensome during periods of high catch volume if the catch increases include crab from many size classes. So for all these reasons, options for size limit changes were not developed. The next option we'll discuss is to prohibit crab trawling. Now, this is a topic we've heard a lot of concern about from stakeholders, primarily because of the conflicts between crab trawlers and crab potters. But crab trawls primarily harvest mature female crabs. Overall, blue crab harvest from crab trawls contribute minimally to the overall harvest, generally accounting for less than 1%. This figure shows the blue crab harvest by crab trawls from 2019 to 2023 by month, with each year color-coded. As you can see, most of the crabs are harvested from trawls December through April, and harvest is highly variable from year to year. Due to the location and the time of the year crab trawls operate, most of the crabs harvested by crab trawls are female of lower market value. Lastly, another issue is the continuing conflicts between the trawlers and the potters over fishing locations. But when discussing crab trawling, even at its peak, trawling made up very little of the overall harvest of crabs. For reference, even if trawling was prohibited all of 2023, it is estimated that we would have seen only a 0.6% reduction in harvest. While trawl harvests don't make up a lot of crabs, this portion of the fishery harvests mostly females during biologically important times of the year prior to spawning, your late fall, winter months. For example, of the 87,812 pounds harvested from trawls in 2023, we estimate roughly 70,000 of those pounds were females overwintering in the mud, preparing to sponge out in the spring. Limiting harvest from this gear might have important stock benefits by protecting females and promoting recruitment. And it's important to note that currently there are very few crabbers participating in the crab trawl fishery. However, any further growth in this industry may be detrimental to the crab stock and to recruitment. Pros for this management option include being easily enforceable, providing protection for female crabs, and it would alleviate conflicts between potters and trawlers. The cons for this option include the fact that it will only affect trawlers and that this management provides very little overall harvest reduction. Next, let's discuss extending the current season closures. Current regulations have a season closure of January 1st through January 31st for areas above the Highway 58 bridge, and a closure from March 1st through March 15th for areas south of the Highway 58 bridge. The options on this table show the estimated harvest reductions if the existing closures were extended and implemented statewide. Since effort can increase during open periods to offset losses during the closed season, it is best to have season closures with a minimum of 2 weeks, but preferably longer. These options show estimated harvest reductions compared to landings in 2023 and the average annual landings from 2019 through 2023. Please note that for illustrated purposes, this table has been color formatted to better display the reduction levels. The darker the green, the higher the estimated reduction. First, let's take a close look at the early season closures. Highlighted here indicates the estimated harvest reductions we would observe if the closure were to be extended statewide to include January and February, from January 1st through the middle of March, and from January 1st through the end of March. Even if we went to the extreme end, that January through the end of March closure, we would only expect a very minimal harvest reduction. This option would need to be combined with other measures to meet the level of harvest reduction needed. A significant concern that we've heard from the public is limiting the extent of any season closure to not affect peeler season due to the profitability of this fishery. Extending the season closure past March would indeed affect the peeler season. So for that reason, we did not pull any options past the end of March. Listed here are some of the pros and cons for extending the season closure in the early part of the year, and I'll just touch on a few for time's sake. Pros, protection provided to crabs during and prior to the mating and spawning seasons, and it's easily enforceable. However, extending the season closure early in the year has some drawbacks, the most of which is the fact that season closures provide no opportunity for crabbers to work, and predicted reductions may be less than expected due to recruitment once the fishery reopens. Now, if we were to extend the season closures back into December, into November, or even into October, we start to see the estimated harvest reductions increase drastically. Late season closures tend to be more effective at achieving harvest reductions because there's less opportunity for recruitment. Once recruitment and in the blue crab fishery, more crabs are being harvested later in the year than in the beginning. However, even though extending the season closures period back from March results in a higher estimated harvest reduction, unless the closure is extended into at least November, the estimated harvest reduction is still low. Again, we're talking about a 5-month closure. Listed here are the pros and the cons for the end of season closure. And I'll just touch on a few again. Again, the pros, protections provided to crabs during and prior to the mating and spawning season. And again, this is easily enforceable. However, extending the season closure late in the year has the drawbacks, where most of which is the fact that season closures provide no opportunity for crabbers to work, and predicted reductions may be less than expected due to recruitment once the fishery reopens. So moving on to our last management strategy, trip limits. Maryland and Virginia each manage blue crab harvest with some sort of trip limit in combination with other measures. Trip limits, unlike complete season closures, allow opportunities for crabbers to continue fishing, allowing for some harvest. Trip limits are adaptable and can be implemented seasonally or incrementally, accounting for market conditions and stock characteristics to evenly distribute harvest reductions across the fishery. Displayed here is a figure that indicates the average number of bushels being landed per trip by month from 2019 to 2023. Please note that this table has been color formatted by row to better display the percentages. When viewing this figure, we can clearly see that most of the commercial landings of hard crabs land between 1 and 15 bushels throughout the year. However, we can also see that in the later months, we start to see a large increase in the number of trips landing above 30 bushels per year. This happens relatively quickly without a gradual transition. We will touch back on this topic later on in the presentation. But to begin examining trip limits, let's first discuss the possibility of implementing a year-round trip limit. This table represents the estimated harvest reduction at any given bushel limit for each month. For illustrative purposes, this chart has been color formatted by column to easily show the estimated reduction. The darker the red, the higher the reduction. But before we get into a year-round bushel limit option, first let's go over this table a little. Again, this table represents the average percent harvest reduction we would have seen if a bushel limit was implemented from 2016 to 2023. The column to the left displays the months, and the row highlighted here shows the bushel limit options. So if we were to implement a 15 bushel limit in the month of October, we estimate that we would have received a harvest reduction of 6%. Now, please note that these reductions assume no change in effort. And again, I would like to remind you that this chart is color formatted by column. So the 6% here is darker than the 9.6% here, due to the 6% being one of the largest reductions we would have seen from a 15 bushel limit in that column. So back to the options. A year-round trip limit on all hard crabs of 15 bushels would result in an estimated harvest reduction of 31.9%. This would be option B in your decision document. For reference, a bushel limit of 20 bushels per trip would be an estimated 22.6% reduction, and a 10 would be a 45.6% reduction, option 1A and 1C in your decision document. Please note that these estimates assume effort will stay the same. If effort increases during times of high demand, harvest reductions may likely not be realized. Moving on to option number 2. We've constantly heard from stakeholders about the markets and how the markets at certain times of the year regulate harvest due to supply and demand. Several times we've heard from crabbers emphasize that any management should not restrict harvest during the summer months, or June through August. Likely because many North Carolina crabbers make the majority of their profits during this time. Option 2 considers this input by implementing trip limits during biologically important periods for blue crabs based on life history outside of that June-August timeframe. So if we were to implement a 15 bushel limit for all hard blue crabs, but this time only instituted from September to December, we estimate the harvest reduction would be 16.4%, option 2B in your decision document. Although this reduction is much lower than the previous option, which was 31.9%, roughly half, this reduction occurs in only 1/3 of the time period and is still estimated to be greater than 15%. However, again, if effort changes, which it likely will, this estimated harvest reduction is unlikely to be met in times of high demand and availability. Option 3 is a combination approach between options 2's bushel limit and a season closure to increase the estimated harvest reduction. We heard a lot of comments from crabbers about management during the early parts of the year, mainly that effort is extremely low during these times, which we have trip ticket data to support that. And supply is low, but the one thing to note is that during the winter months, prices for blue crabs soar, primarily due to the closures in other crab producing states. Options implementing trip limits in the early season would be less intrusive to the majority of crabbers due to the lack of trips during this time. Also, protecting crabs, primarily the females that made it through the winter months during the time of the year just before they spawn, would help promote increased recruitment. So this option, option 3B in your decision document, looks at a 15 bushel limit from September through November and extends statewide closure from December through March. This option would result in an estimated harvest reduction of 22.3%, which is much closer to the option 1 reduction. The primary function of these options would be to limit catch, with the assumption that crabbers will change fishing practices not to exceed the limit. Pros for all hard crab bushel limits is the reduced harvest could result in more crabs being able to reproduce, and because protections provided during and prior to the mating and spawning seasons, regulations are simple and easily enforceable while distributing the reductions evenly throughout the state. But While trip limits for all hard crabs offer a straightforward approach to managing blue crab harvest, there are some major drawbacks. One concern is crabbers driven by high demand and prices may increase fishing effort beyond pre-regulation levels to meet demand, despite the trip limit. This could lead to a steady or increased pressure on the crab populations, even if the daily limits are adhered to. For example, if I was a crabber that normally lands 20 bushels every other day and a bushel limit of 10 was instituted, I may just simply increase the number of trips and start fishing every day, collecting 10 bushels, which will result in no reduction at all. I still fish the same number of pots, and I just fish half my pots one day and the other half the next. Because of this, estimated reductions for these options may be inflated due to the change in effort during the times of high demand and high volume, their summer and fall months. Furthermore, crabbers may fish pots less frequently, holding their catch in unfished pots to avoid exceeding the daily trip limit, constantly fishing more gear than necessary. Trip limits will also increase time to sort and cull their catch and lead to discarding of small, legal size, and lower valued crabs as crabbers prioritize keeping the largest crabs to maximize their value of catch within the limit. Now, to be clear, these options are limitless, but for time's sake, I'll save that discussion. Now that I've displayed our thought process working through the numerous outcomes of limitless combinations, I would now like to dive into the division's preliminary recommendation. However, before I can do so, we have one more element that we have not yet discussed, and that's sex-specific management. As you see, crabs possess an amazing attribute, which is the ability for harvesters to easily differentiate crabs based on sex. And unlike most fish species we manage, we can target management aimed at conserving crabs based on their sex. This table shows the estimated harvest reduction for mature females only, trip limits by month. Again, for illustrative purposes, this has been color-coded by column to easily show the estimated level of reduction. This table is very similar to the one that we just looked at. And the reason for that is the majority of the reductions taking place is in the fall months where primarily females are targeted. In addition, these females, which are usually your lesser valued market category, are getting harvested at higher rates at times of the year when their market value is even less. Most crabs during these later months are being sold in bulk to picking houses or sold as coals, mixed, or straights. So if we were to take our last option, option 3, and apply it to mature females only, lowering the bushel limit to 10 bushels instead of 15 from September through December, and prohibit harvest of mature females only from January through May, we estimate that this would result in a 17.1% reduction. Option 7 in your decision document. Unlike the first 3 options, the all hard crab bushel limits, harvest reduction estimates for this option may be low because of how females are targeting during these times of the year. At the end of the year, crabs, particularly females, become more available due to their location and mobility. When the water cools, the female crabs and male crabs start to separate. Females usually prefer your saltier environments near inlets and stay relatively active and mobile. Male crabs become more lethargic as to not waste energy and to stay in less saltier waters, usually your rivers. Crabbers that target males usually leave their pots in place, less pots than they were fishing in the summer, and they fish less often, every 3 to 5 days instead of every day or every other day, before finally picking up their pots due to the season closures. Crabbers that target females tend to fish their pots more often, needing to constantly move their pots, following the cast of females as they move. Crabbers targeting females during these times of the year are not making nearly the profit margins they were in the summer months due to being mostly sold as culls, and they rely mainly on quantity to make it worth their effort. If we were to implement a mature female bushel limit in these later months, it is likely effort may decline as not enough female crabs can be landed to make fishing profitable, leaving more mature females available for next year's spawn. So this option can further be modified to extend the 10 bushel limit from June through December. This option limits mature female harvest throughout the year rather than allowing a completely open harvest during the summer, which should increase the abundance of spawning females. This option, option 8, is the division's preliminary recommendation. This option is a mature female 10 bushel limit per trip, June through December, before switching to a zero harvest of mature females from January through May. This option is estimated to result in a 21.7% harvest reduction. Again, we're not using the updated stock assessment to inform harvest reductions because of the concerns raised by the division and external peer reviewers. However, if we were to use the updated stock assessment, we would be statutorily required to implement reductions no less than 45%. The division's preliminary recommendation is less than half of what would be required. I'll also note that this option would be applied to recreational fisheries as well. So recreational crabbers would not be able to harvest mature females from January through May. To reiterate, the intent of the division's preliminary recommendation is to promote blue crab recruitment and increase abundance by targeting management towards protection of mature females. Mature females have a lower market value, and mature females are essential for the future of the blue crab stock. The blue crab FMP is currently scheduled to review in 2026, and if adopted at that time, we'll reevaluate the effectiveness of this management. Our approach, guided by the adaptive management framework, emphasizes clear, quantifiable, and uncomplicated management. This two-step option presented here exemplifies this straightforward approach, attempting to keep regulations simple. So, the pros and the cons of this option. Pros: implemented in times of life history importance, providing protections to mature female crabs during and prior to the mating and spawning seasons. Also, unlike the all hard crab bushel limits, if adopted, this option is likely to have crabbers fish all of their active gear instead of leaving it out there like holding tanks, collecting the males and releasing the females once the female limit is met. This option will also likely result in the end of crab trawling due to most of the trawl catch being females in the late and early times of the year. This option will be implemented in times of high harvest and low market value and will not interrupt peeler season as mature females do not shed. In addition, a lot of literature points out that the first brood spring females being larger and more fecund. Larvae spawned in the spring shows increased growth and development and lower mortality due to lower water temperatures and higher phytoplankton concentrates. Protecting mature females en route to overwintering and allowing them to spawn in the spring could result in increased recruitment and crab abundance. The cons. This option has the potential to skew the blue crab's natural sex ratio. However, due to the way we're currently harvesting crabs, overwhelmingly mature females in the late year, we may have already been messing up this ratio. In addition, this option will unevenly distribute the reductions throughout the state. Crabbers in higher salinity areas, primarily those of the eastern Pamlico Sound and the southern part of the state, will be more heavily impacted than crabbers on the western Albemarle Sound or the western side of the Pamlico Sound. So, in conclusion, all available data indicates that the blue crab stock is not recovering as projected. While harvest reductions have occurred, these are likely not the result of continued declines. These are likely the result of continued declines in the blue crab stock, not the result of management action. Today, we're nearly halfway through the statutorily required Amendment 3 rebuilding period with little indication the stock recovery will be successful. Additionally, additional management should reduce harvest above the statutorily required minimum to increase the probability of stock recovery, even when the variability of harvest is high. Lastly, to rebuild female spawner abundance and promote recruitment, the division's preliminary recommendation focuses in on implementing protective measures for mature females only. This approach is designed to minimize the impact on crabbers by focusing in on the protection of mature female crabs, which are generally your less valued sex economically, but are vital to the recruitment of the future of the blue crab stock. This direction aims to achieve sustainable balance between conservation and the needs of the industry. Now, I would like to thank you for your time and attention as I've outlined this complex topic and our thought process. As directed by the Marine Fisheries Commission, we explored numerous management options while integrating significant stakeholder input. We recognize that the blue crab fishery as being vital to North Carolina's economy and fisheries, and any future management requires careful consideration. We believe our preliminary recommendation strikes a balance between protecting the blue crab stock through strategically timed harvest limitations and incorporating input we've received from the crabbing community on how they would like to see the fishery managed. This approach is aimed to rebuild the declining stock while considering the concerns of those who rely on it. As a reminder, after this meeting, the division will review your input and preferred management and may revise the preliminary recommendations if needed. The final revision, along with your recommendations, will then be brought back to the MFC at the upcoming May or August meeting for final vote. At this time, we will gladly take any questions and before you vote on advisory committee recommendations.
Thank you, Robert. Are there any questions from the advisory committee right now relative to the presentation, not relative to the discussion about?
You mentioned about the updated stock assessment not being accepted because of the changes in the biological reference points, the big difference there. What caused that?
Currently, we're unaware. The peer reviewers have recommended some changes to the overall stock assessment, but the changes that they recommended, we would have to implement a new benchmark. So nothing could just be tweaked or done. Essentially, we would need a new benchmark to go off management.
This is just mysteries of the data. I'm not quite sure I understand. You have a significant change in these reference points. You have a tighter, higher and tighter on some of these, and you don't know what happened in the run. I'm confused there.
Currently, we don't. So the issue was that the benchmark stock assessment and the updated assessments is the same model that's running. However, what happened was when we included 6 more years of data, all of a sudden the reference points went crazy. And we just haven't been able to pinpoint exactly what that was.
So, okay, so the extra input is what?
Correct. It was the 6 additional years of data.
Okay.
And obviously, the more data that we input, the further we'll see changes.
The sperm limitation, is this thought to be a problem for crabs, since this isn't generally a problem for most species? You can have a drastically biased female proportion of the population, and females can get it done, basically. Is this not the issue for crabs?
There's depending on what research paper you look at, apparently it could potentially could be experimental.
Like much less than 50-50, or is this?
I'm not sure of the exact ratio.
I know people back there cannot.
If y'all can please try to speak a little bit louder, because nobody in the back can hear you.
So essentially, what McLean was getting at is right now there's very little scientific articles that are looking at the sperm limitations of crabs. There are some, however, the sampling is just small at this point. But that's something that definitely can be looked into.
How does the division justify implementing adaptive management without an updated stock assessment? If you don't meet requirement number 1, how can you go to anything else in the adaptive management?
So currently going to adaptive management, we're basing this off of long-term declining trends in the fishery. So even though the stock assessment is unusable at this point, we're looking at the overall trends in spawner abundance and recruitment and seeing that fishing mortality is relatively unchanged and is still high. So for those reasons, we're trying to do something at least on a smaller statute now than we would have in the future, where we may be statutorily required to.
Well, first of all, we don't believe that you're doing something small, number one, because none of these reductions are small.
And I don't know how you can, what are your biological reference points we're even trying to achieve? How can you, how do you know where our thresholds are at when your stock assessment is already 6 years old? And your original peer reviewers didn't even recommend it, using it past the 5-year period. They said that they need to run another model before you went past the 5-year time. And we're a couple of years past that now, we're on our 6th year. So how do you even know where your thresholds are at?
So the issue for adaptive management is, what are we looking at? Like, I can't pull a number out of the air. I can't just say, you know what, I think we need a 10% harvest reduction. I think we need a 50%. I think we need this. We have to have some justification for that. So for that, that's why we looked at the original benchmark stock assessment. And then the benchmark stock assessment, which is the best data that we have currently. That data was peer reviewed, and it showed that to meet the female spawner abundance with 100% probability of success, it will require a 19.8% reduction. So for those reasons, we focus most of our options around 19.8% reductions, because currently we're halfway through that statutorily required building period, and we have very little evidence showing that we will ever meet those targets.
Well, my problem is when we go to update this FMP in the next 2 to 5 years, we're going to have a totally different biological threshold that's going to come out of this next stock assessment. And we don't even know where we don't know where we're at. And we don't know where we're going to go. So how can you tell us that we have to reduce this amount of harvest to achieve something that we don't even know what we're trying to achieve?
Yeah, I understand that completely. And again, it's the difficulty of finding that percentage of what we need. So we're looking at overall declining trends. And the trends aren't just in landings. They aren't just with recruitments. They're with participation. They're with effort. I mean, they're with the number of trips. We're seeing these constant trends. So right now, we're trying to implement something that hopefully will impact the fishery so we can start seeing the increases.
You're not looking at all the trends either. That's something the peer reviewers brought up in the original stock assessment. You only went back to 1994. We have landings data all the way back to 1950, and we have had a little bit of ups and downs in commercial landings over that entire time period. Part of the problem with starting that stock assessment in 1994 is we've had a consistent downward trend, and these models can't handle there's no peaks and valleys. And I don't even understand how a species that doesn't even live 5 years can never have a peak in recruits. I've worked with a lot of different stock assessments, and I've never seen a stock assessment with no banner year of recruits and the stock hasn't collapsed. So I don't know how that we don't have proof of some sort of spike in recruits to spike in landings, because we have reduced fishermen. Fishermen are gone. They're dying. We have half the amount of fishermen in this industry, in crabbing alone, we had 15, 20 years ago. So effort is down, down, down. And yet we have still had a peak in landings these last 2 years, but none of the division data is showing an increase in recruits. And that concerns me, because that tells me that there's a problem with the data we have in our stock assessment. The peer reviewers brought up multiple issues in the first stock assessment. They questioned natural mortality, they questioned SPR, they questioned the biological thresholds. They questioned survey lists. They questioned using NEMAP survey to get your abundance survey out in the Atlantic Ocean. And they said that this stuff could be ultra conservative, ultra liberal. So they don't know what happened. And then when we updated it, the thresholds doubled in half. So something is inherently wrong with this model, not putting the right information in it. And to ask people to take 40 to 50% of their livelihood when you don't even have any justification anywhere on any of these papers is completely wrong. I don't understand why the division is even doing it.
I understand, and I wish I could comment on some of those concerns regarding the stock assessment. I wish I was a stock assessment scientist that could answer some of these very detailed questions about that. But currently, when we're looking at the overall trends, you said it yourself, we have 1/5 of the number of participants we've had. We're going down a number of effort. Obviously, something is wrong. What can we do to start increasing that?
But
Is there anything we can do?
you've seen a peak in landings the last 2 years, and no one's even addressed that in these levels. If the information is so bad, it's so dire, we need to start looking at the current data now, like for the abundance surveys from this year and all that information. You can't go and do intermediate management such a harsh scale
with no supporting documentation. And the division said themselves that we don't have any supporting documentation at this stage of the process.
And to your note, you're 100% right. We have saw an increase in 2023, which that graph shows. And in 2024, the numbers are not finalized yet. However, anecdotally, and even going to the fish houses, I can tell you that we did have a better year. We're talking about better years than 2022, which was the lowest year on record, period. So I sure hope you did better than 2022.
In your time series, in your time series in the stocks, and if you go back to 1950, where you have data for where we had a lot of years where you were around 8 to 12 million pounds of crabs or harvest.
That, and, you know, so it's not just the landings overall. It's also recruitment. It's the independent data that shows a model, because people didn't fish the same way as they did in the 50s. They don't fish the same way as they did in the 90s. Heck, you don't even fish the same way as you did 5 years ago, it seems like.
I understand that.
So it's hard to compare that in a stock assessment model.
When this started, we had the most crabs we've ever seen in history in North Carolina. So we started at the very peak for that stock assessment. In the 1990s, there was crab pots one end of the sound to the other, up every river, up every creek, up every stream. Everybody that had a boat and had space in yard had crab pots. We started all the way up there, and that's what we're basing all this management off of, was the peak of all time high crabs. So of course, there's nothing anywhere to go but down. My thing is, like, we've got to look past that and see what kind of cyclical cycle we had before that, before you go telling people that, because you're asking for a 21% reduction. That's a reduction in harvest. That's not a reduction in income. That's gonna be a reduction of 30 to 50% income for these people sitting in this room. It's not a 20% reduction in income. The spring crabs are worth 2, 4, 5, 6 times the price they are in the fall. So that's the difference right here. 20% out of the paycheck is a lot different than 50% out of the paycheck, and that's the problem.
Absolutely. And I understand what you're saying. And so when we're looking at reduction numbers, there's many ways that you could essentially get that reduction. And what we try to do is get the biggest bang for our buck and try to affect crabbers, the least number of crabbers, the least amount we can. I can get that same percentage by doing complete season closures, but that allows opportunities for nobody. Trip limits at least allow for some harvest in certain areas. And these trip limits aren't set in stone. Those charts up there, you can look at and say, hey, maybe we can do this number of trips in this time of the year. Maybe that will help. We don't need that much harvest. But what we attempted to do is affect the least number of people that we could and try to get the biggest bang for our buck, meaning that we are trying to get recruitments. That's why the division is focusing in our efforts on protecting mature females. And now you also said that, you know, back in the 90s, there was crab pots everywhere. Why aren't they there now?
Why hasn't the stock collapsed is what I want to know. There's been, it's a short-lived species. Every short-lived species I've ever looked at, they've had some sort of spike in their life history that keeps the population back. But for something like this 5 years, and we have a pretty much 45-degree downtrend, there should be some spikes along that trend to bring that population back there. Because something that's on a constant downtrend, down cycle, that only lives 2 to 5 years, it ain't gonna be here long.
So I think actually the short lifespan is actually more beneficial to not showing that complete die off and drop, because in certain fisheries, say these long-lived fish species, if you have 3 or 4 bad year classes in a row, that is your decline. It just drops. Crabs, however, produce majority of the year. It's not, just a certain time period. Yes, the majority of them do focus in on that early season. However, there's reports of crabs being able to sponge out 7 times a year. And with their short life history and their short lifespan, that actually kind of makes up for it, where yes, maybe last year was bad for recruits, but 2022 would easily replace the 2021 recruits just by their short lifespan. You're having more crabs entering in to that adult stage, producing crabs.
We're gonna go out to the public now for comment. We have a long list. So if you will keep your comments to 3 minutes, we've got a timer. And, we'll move on from there. Based on some of these signatures, bear with me as I try to figure their names in. First, it looks like Wayne Hodges.
And Chair Winslow, if you don't mind, I have up on the screen here a color it'll be green during your talk. When you get to 30 seconds left, I'll change it to yellow. When you get to 3 minutes, I'll change it to red, just so y'all are well aware of kind of where you're at in that timeline.
Yeah, I like to say a lot of that PSA is talking about, because like the gentleman said over here, it's probably 25% crowd.
Can you come to just so the speaker gets you here?
Probably 25% less.
To this chair right here, yes, sir. Thank you.
So that microphone will pick you up.
I'd say it's probably 25% the crabbers today than was in the 80s and 90s. I mean, never one of y'all never crabbed, I don't guess. Won't y'all take a pay cut the same time you want the crabbers to? Don't take a check, if that's what you want. You know, that's ridiculous. I mean, you want to put the whole eastern part of the state, what few crab houses left, out of business and the crabbers. So I think y'all need to think about what you're saying.
Thanks, sir. Reggie Bishop. David Gallup.
I walked in this meeting tonight, with some pretty positive thinking, maybe thinking that we could, find some points of compromise. I had some really good points, but after watching that slideshow, I like to say, see you in court.
Richard Newman.
So I watched the slideshow. If I heard correctly, the recruitment is down in all across the state or all across the East Coast. Virginia and Maryland have had these trip limits since the early 2000s. They're having the same issue with recruitment per staff. We're getting a lot of regulation here with nothing to back it up. Industry seeing increases over the last couple of years. We did, as an industry, a catch amount for 2024. Even without the November and December numbers, it was 27.7% over the 5-year average. The only other year that was above the 5-year average was 2023. Staff is put in a lot of regulations with Amendment 3. And before they've had a chance to even take effect, they're already making recommendations on new rules. As the industry, we saw that their catch reductions work. I mean, after they put them in, catch went down the next 2 years. We get a lot of regulation of catches down. Well, you all put regulations in already that were designed to lower catch. Now it's doing that, and you're saying landings are down. That's what your regulations were meant to do. We never see, oh, our regulations work. Let's give back. It's always, oh, it didn't work. Let's take more. And as some have already said, if this goes this way, this is going to be in court. This isn't going to stand. We've had sorry science for marine fisheries for years now, and they've put a lot of industries out, and this one isn't going to stand for it. Thank you.
Paul Beals.
Can you break up the slide that has the landings and the participants, or do you have enough time to get that over that? While he's bringing it up, I'll start for a second, but there's been a question about why there's not more participants in it. And the first thing I would ask, why do you have so many, openings in your division staff? Why aren't there more people taking those positions? I mean, there's a lot. Onto the left side here, into the mid-90s, the heyday, 2,000 people, 40, 60 million crabs, never happened again. We don't have the market capacity. We don't have the people. It will never happen again. And that is what's skewing your numbers. You want to know what is happening? I just told you that's why it's happening. And I had a big speech that I was going to do. And just like David, I wanted to negotiate and discuss and try to get something we could move forward to. But I've changed on that. And it's like Winston Churchill says, you cannot negotiate with a tiger when your head is in its mouth. Tiger's going to have to die for us to move forward, and we're moving forward.
Dennis Cox,
My name's Dennis Cox. I'm a very opinionated person, I'm sure. Marine fishery knows. I don't understand why marine fisheries don't do something about the water quality. I call, I complain. On our side of the sound, we don't got a 2-mile buffer zone of the crop spraying. And I ain't got nothing against the farmers, but y'all don't factor in nothing what kills the crabs, the fish, nothing. That chemical they spray is killing everything. It's killing us. Cancer. I mean, that's what's causing it. But I'm just saying. But if that chemical is going into the water and it's killing crabs, and y'all killing us, everything I do, oh, it ain't our fault. Water quality ain't got nothing to do with marine fisheries. Why don't marine fisheries go against water quality one time instead of take it from us? Every time I turn around, my fish is dead in the pound nets. Well, Dennis, move your pound net. I can't move my pound net. I'm just saying that crab can't run from that chemical. It is what it is. Quit taking away from the fishermen everything. Trout, mullet. I mean, what else? Everything's down. Why do you think everything's down? It's because stuff is in the water. If you got runoff, it's going to kill the crabs. It's just common sense. I guess I got to get a 4-year degree to tell you how to do your job. Because obviously when I call marine fisheries all the time, and I'm just a complainer. I don't complain for myself. I complain for everybody because, look, after a while, y'all got to have some common sense. Just a little bit. Why you keep taking from us and not give us nothing back? The herrings, 25 years, that's Sarah's job. Why ain't we got that back? Why don't we get nothing back? All y'all do is take. Why we focus on crabs now is because you took everything else. The only thing I can do is drop net. A stupid catfish. Can't catch nothing else. If you leave your nets out, we kept up with the catfish population because you can control it. Now the catfish is eating everything. And you know what? Catfish got to eat too. We got to eat. So I'm just saying, let us start fishing nets and maybe it'll take a little bit of pressure off crabbing. That's just my point of view. Thank you.
Jimmy Simbold.
Good evening. My name is Jimmy Seabold. I'm a full-time commercial fisherman from Pamlico County. I do not believe the MFC can make any changes to the blue crab FMP without an updated stock assessment. In 2023, crab landings were up 5% compared to the previous 5-year average. And in 2024, they were up 14.5%. And I heard that other gentleman said 22 or 27, even better, right? Which makes me question why we are here today. These changes to the FMP would not only be unjust, but would cripple our local economy, put a lot of us out of business. With increased operating costs and over-regulation from the MFC, you're snatching the food from my family's mouth, and that's a problem. And thank you all.
Kelly Adela.
Good evening. My name is Kelly Padilla. I'm a sixth-generation commercial fisherman. I'm here this evening fighting for my livelihood. It is hard to understand how 9 people can decide the fate for thousands of people's lives without having any current data to support it. Any of the proposed changes to crabbing would be devastating to our industry. However, for me, and I'm sure others, I believe that's what the marine fishery wants, for it to be devastating. All but everything has been taken away from us, and it's an absolute shame to have to sit here and watch you take it away from us. In reality, we all know what happens. CCA funds the money, and marine fishery makes the laws they want. It's all about greed and money.
Thank you.
Lauren Birch or Bunch?
I know y'all have a big document in front of you already. I'm starting now. My name is Lauren Birch. I appreciate you listening, and I hope that you read those documents. It can tell you a lot more than I can say in 3 minutes. First, I'd really like to push to have this pushed back to the August meeting. I think it would show a large respect for the industry and not make it do it during May when they are during their biggest time. Everybody's tired of May. Nobody knows their name. Don't do that. Show some respect for them and push it back in August. Also, Amendment 3 requires a quantitative measurement. There's no way to quantitative or have a quantitative analysis of what's been going on the last few years. Dr. Cole, all of my references are cited on there too. Dr. Cole has a study about the difference in COVID-19 on the fishing fishing efforts. So it talks about the business as usual COVID-19 fish reduction of over 50% we had for 3 years. So a life cycle of a crab is 12 to 18 months to become mature, and we had 3 years of fishing harvest reduction. If a 50% for 3 years didn't work, why are we saying that it's going to work now? With a 25, you had a 5.5% reduction with a 90% probability, and now you're saying that 50%, but you're not even going to look at that. The analysis is ridiculous. You have research, not a single study from an independent source for the last 15 years. Until 2007, we still thought that there was a single clutch. We know from 2007 that, Darnell, you referenced this, but your reviewer said 2007, 2008 is when your, I guess, indices changed. Another thing, you don't have a size-specific stock model, seasonal size specific. He gave you 4 recommendations. That's an easy one to do, but you ignored that. So all of your models up there are wrong because they're based on antiquated tactics. There have been so many studies. I mean, that's just me. I am not a biologist. I'm a crab dealer. Y'all can do better. Thank you.
Zeb, I can make that last name. Mayo.
I'm Zeb Mayo. I don't know, like if y'all are taking into consideration, like, take trawling, okay? They don't go trawling, probably not gonna catch shrimp. They don't go fishing with a gill net, probably not gonna catch fish. As a crabber, they use 400 or 500 pounds of bait from pretty much open to closure every day. We're feeding these crabs. If they're small, they're coming out of our pots. If if you put these kind of regulations on it where we're not allowed to fish, we can't afford to fish. We wouldn't be able to go feed the crabs in the beginning of the year up to June, and then we wouldn't from June to December be able to make enough money to fish. So what kind of catastrophic effect would it take on the crabs, not getting fed when we've been feeding them for, 50 years? Thank you.
Curtis Price.
I mean, back to what everybody else said, you're trying to base something off of data that you don't have. If you look at landings in 23, 24, and even the start of this year, they're all on the rise. They're above your numbers that you're trying to base this off of. And look at it from the fisherman standpoint. If they can't catch the fish, if they can't catch the crabs, they're not going to crab. This time of year, it's basically all females that they're catching. If they can't catch the females, they're not going to catch the males. And the limits that you're talking about putting on, they can't feasibly survive with what you're saying they can catch. So they're not going to be crabbing. So basically, the limits that you're trying to put on them are saying, hey, don't crab anymore. Because if they can't make a living doing it, they're not going to do it. I mean, I think that should be pretty common knowledge to educated people. If you can't pay the bills doing it, you're not going to do it. I mean, I don't know what else to say other than, and you're affecting more than just the fishermen. You're affecting the fishermen. You're affecting the fish houses that pack the crabs. You're affecting the picking houses that pick the crabs. You're affecting all up and down the East Coast, not just the fishermen here in North Carolina. I mean, how can you do something on numbers that you don't have and figures that you don't have? I mean, the crab population is on the rise, not on the fall. I mean, we can show you the numbers to prove it. And you're saying, oh, don't crab anymore. I think that that's something that needs to be looked at before you say, oh, well, this is what we're going to do. Look at the total picture, not just antiquated data.
That were all the individuals that had signed up. Yes.
Hi, so I'm Tara Foreman. We have Captain Niels in Columbia, North Carolina. And I'd
Speak up, please. Other people can't hear you.
Tara Foreman from Captain Niels in Columbia, North Carolina. So I just want to address a couple things. I keep hearing you say that you want to see participation. All you keep saying is, when are the participants going to come back? How can we get the participants to come back? They are not coming back. I think you've been told multiple times they're not coming back. I even contacted my bank while we were sitting here and I said, what is the likelihood that you would give a loan to a new graduate from high school to buy crab pots and a boat so that they can continue this path? No, there is no likelihood that I would give it. They can't get loans. It'll cost $150,000 to $200,000 to get in. So who is going to fund them so that they can be a commercial fisherman if they don't already have it, or if their family's not already in it so it can be passed down? It's not coming back. You're not going to have participants like that again. And when your harvest levels are down, you've lost 75% of your participants. Another thing of it is the blue crab lives approximately 2 years, the female 18 months. If we have no juvenile recruitment and no spawning abundance, so when our levels were down in 2022 to 9 million, how did we go back to 2024? And we do have the data all the way through December, except the fact that we don't have handwritten trip tickets in. So that data is 17,719,000. However, I added up just 2 participants' data and it went to 18,500,000. Well, if you would figure in the 200 plus lay days where the stock was there, but the market wasn't there, you would be up to about 24 million. So again, if there's no juvenile recruitment and there's no spawning abundance, where did the crabs come from when their lifespan is that short? The data's flawed. You're trying to make management decisions on bad data that follows a bad management plan. So I met with the guy who failed the stock assessment. When we told him what was happening in the marine fisheries, he was bored. He couldn't believe that you were making any kind of management decision based on the fact that your stock assessment had failed. He listed 5 things for y'all to do to the stock assessment to show that there was a highly unlikelihood of overfishing or that it was being overfished. And he also said the estimated fishing mortality is extremely unrealistically high. What else? The reviewers recommended investigating an integrated seasonal size assessment model, which is often used for crustacean in the future. Another thing you're saying is that you're trying to follow the steps of Maryland. Maryland has a different plan than us. Maryland takes 12 to 1,500.
Keep going.
12 to 1,500 stock assessment dredge surveys every year. They also have capped license. They have different pot limits. You're trying to put a crabber in a box, okay? You say that this crabber is the same as this crabber. That's not what happens. You have some crabbers in here that fish 3 months of the year. You have some people that target jimmies. You have some people that have target females. Some commercial fishermen make all their money from October to December. Your 2 largest fish houses in the United States are in 2 tier 1 counties, Hyde County and Terrell County. That's when they pick crabs. That's when they get to put their inventory up. That's when they get to make their money that floods the economies for 2 tier 1 counties. I don't think you're looking at the big picture. You're trying to pull one thing out and put it in a little box when you have 474 participants that crab differently everywhere they are. They crab differently in Wilmington, they crab differently in Wanchese, they crab differently in Columbia. You can't compare them all as one. And far as getting your surveys from the fish houses, well, that's flawed too, because you're not taking a participant or a crabber and grading his whole thing or measuring all of his crabs. You're picking out a few things. I know at our place, they measure a piece of a bushel, they measure the barrel at the end of the table, that's the culls. Then they leave and then they come back and they want to know, well, what did Charlie have today, his whole day? And then it's put in culls. And then you have a formula where you say, well, we're going to take and say 70% of that was females and 30% of that was males. What if you're not even catching any females? Or what if you're catching all females? It's inaccurate data. And you're about to destroy the lives of 474 participants exponentially, because they have helpers, they have families, we have workers, we have 110 workers that we bring every year. Just in the tax base, the utility base, everything in Terrell County, that would be a major economic downfall. You have to look at it all, and you have to have accurate data, which you don't have at this time. I don't even think you have the authority to do what you're doing. Thank you.
As I said, that was the end of the public comment. We'll now come back to the table, to the advisory committee to discuss relative to the management options. We all have the option table that we kind of usually go through on amendment.
So we do have the division's recommendations, which would be the last slide after our name.
Before we get started, can I make a motion to extend this vote to the MFC, recommend to the MFC to extend this vote?
She did last time.
Everybody was just gonna ask for it.
Who is that that's voting? Somebody online? Oh,
I don't know, I heard that too, but I don't know.
Something along.
I don't know what they said, but
go ahead, Thomas, I'm sorry.
I just wondered, before we get started in the discussion, can I make a motion to extend the final vote into the August MFC meeting, just so that the MFC knows that we're not voting? at the next meeting cycle. That,
You can make that recommendation.
I'll second it.
I'll second.
Have a motion by Thomas Newman to recommend to the Marine Fisheries Commission not to take final action on Amendment 3 at their next meeting.
I have a question about this. What data would show up between now and August that would possibly change the limit on this?
it's not a data issue, it's a lack of transparency issue. The Marine Fisheries was scheduled to speak about this subject at February meeting. February meeting was rescheduled into March, and into March, they had an abbreviated agenda, and the blue crab was pulled off the agenda. So we haven't heard any discussion at the MFC at the public level on the blue crab issue. And if this were to go for final vote in the May meeting, that would be the only discussion MFC would have publicly would be at the May meeting while they have the vote. So there's no delay in between MFC discussion for public comment and public period to discuss the options they chose before they vote on it.
It's mainly to ensure to get adequate public review and public comment and discussion by the commission.
Yes, ma'am.
So is there any discussion on the motion? And do you have those online where you can, they're raising their hand or? Okay. Seeing no discussion, we'll go for a roll call vote.
Blake,
Aye.
Bruno,
Aye.
Clark,
Aye.
Creighton,
Aye.
Dunbar,
Aye.
Gaskell,
Aye.
Makowski,
Aye.
Newman,
Aye.
Jamie Winslow,
Aye.
Worthington, and Chair Winslow.
Aye. Motion passes. Okay, now returning to the management options and discussion thereof. And this is the division's preliminary recommendation. You've got in your issue papers the other options that were outlined and proposed. Actually, any of those are open for recommendation by or discussion by the advisory committee.
As listening to all these people, the solar earth people here, they know a lot more what's going on than what the marine fisheries know. And I've been in this business 50 years. And I can tell you there's bad years, there's good years, but we survived. And there's by no means no problem with crabs at this point. If there was, and I thought y'all could do something about it, I would agree to some of it. But nothing that y'all can do or we can do to come up with whatever you want to do. But so what I'm gonna do right now, I'm gonna make a motion that we keep it as status quo, what we have right now, and not mess with none of this here recommendations. So I'm making a motion that we go status quo and stay the same what we're doing and keep on doing what we're doing.
I would second that motion.
Have a motion by Wayne Dunbar, second by Jamie Winslow, to maintain status quo for Amendment 3 of the adaptive management. Discussion by members of the advisory committee.
I'll agree with the motion and I'll give a rationale why is because the management we've implemented is working. And it's also, we haven't
had a whole lot of time to really see where we're at. And like I say, we're seeing an uptick. And there's no sense in slashing the whole industry over an adaptive management, not even a fisheries management plan in between two fishermen. You cannot slash the industry with little to no data. So I will agree to vote for this motion.
Chair Winslow, Morton had his hand raised about the time that motion was made. If you want to just make sure Morton doesn't have something to say, he put it down, but.
Morton, have you got any comment? I don't have a computer, so I can use your hand.
Yeah, no, first of all, just the division recommendation, I don't see any way on earth that is only a 21.7% harvest reduction, because no one in any part of the state where there's significant numbers of female crabs is going to be able to make it with those measures. So I'm with Thomas Newman. I think we already put measures in place that were supposed to give us a decent chance of achieving sustainable harvest. We did what we were required to by state law, or rather the predecessors on the Marine Fisheries Commission did what they were required to do. And I mean, if harvests are down, how is that not already a reduction? Like, I mean, it just seems like we're in a no-win game here. And it's been this case with several fisheries now, where the stock assessment for mullets was from the year 2019. And then you had 2020, where there was no roe mullet season to speak of because of economic conditions. And then we came back with two of the biggest years on mullets since the 90s, when there were way more people fishing. And yet somehow there's such a problem with mullets, we've got new regulations on them. Same with trout. So yeah, basically I'm for Mr. Newman's or Mr. Dunbar's amendment or recommendation. That's my piece.
Thank you. Anybody else got a hand? Any other comments, discussion by the committee?
Well, I will say, yeah, as a recreational fisherman, I don't make my living doing this. But I've heard enough anecdotal information about the increasing crabs over the last few years. When I go back and I look 2025 or 2005 now, yes, there has been some decline, but can't take an effect 2000 or 1997, because let's just face it, there's not a single crab alive that's made it that far. If we're seeing increased catches, if we're seeing landings go up, if we're seeing the value of those landings increase, although we don't have as many people fishing, it's showing fish that they are coming back some, that there is an opportunity for them to regrow. What I'd love to be able to see is the landing data up to date for 2024, 2025, best we can, before they go into August meeting. So you can see some of the changes and hopefully some of the increase. Because if we can go back and show 24, 25 catch levels in June, and we're showing the uptick and we're showing the trend to be there, then I don't think we have to take an action today. But I think that data needs to be, even if it's not 100% perfect, the catch data from the trip tickets needs to show up ahead of time.
That should be finalized by what, June?
Yes.
For 2024.
Yes.
So yeah, and even if there's not a finalized data for that part of 25, 26 or 25, it'd be nice to see something put together in front showing the first 7 months of 2025. But you know, and I may be the world's worst person to get voted on by recreational fishermen, but maybe recreational fishermen shouldn't keep any females. I never keep a female, period, whether the size or not. It's not a lot, but putting them back in may not be a bad idea.
Any other comments from committee? Seeing no comments, I'll call the vote.
Blake,
Aye.
Bruno, Clark,
Aye.
Creighton,
I'm going to abstain.
Dunbar, Gaskell,
Aye.
Makowski, Newman,
Aye.
Jamie Winslow,
Aye.
Worthington. That's it. And Chair Winslow.
No. Motion passes. Any other action by the committee relative to Amendment 3?
Make the motion, we adjourn.
We got some comments for Jesse. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chair Winslow. I just wanted to give a quick update to the advisory committee members regarding the MFC meeting that just took place last week in Kitty Hawk, that kind of rescheduled meeting that was supposed to take place in February. So what was adopted, what was voted on at that March meeting, the commission voted to move forward with Amendment 4 to the Southern Flounder Fishery Management Plan. And one of the things that means is what they actually voted on is sending it out to the public and advisory committee review. Because they voted to do that, the committees, the Northern, Southern, and Finfish advisory committees now have to have another meeting before the May meeting. So that meeting will be for the Northern AC. April 10th is the tentative date we have with that. I will get information out to y'all this week about that meeting just to make sure everybody has it as soon as possible. And I'm sure y'all are aware of this, but just to reiterate, that Amendment 4 discussion is shifting the allocation in the Southern Flounder fishery from what's currently scheduled to be 60-40 for 2025, 60% commercial, 40% recreational. It would shift the allocation to 50-50, so 50% commercial and 50% recreational. Moving on from Southern Flounder, the Marine Fisheries Commission voted on final adoption of the Spotted Sea Trout Fishery Management Plan, Amendment 1. And included in that amendment was for the recreational fishery a 14 to 20 inch slot limit with an allowance of 1 fish over 26 inches and a 3 fish bag limit. For the commercial fishery, it's a Saturday through Sunday closure, January through September, and a Saturday through Monday closure, October through December. And also in regards to the commercial measures, it was voted to formalize the stop net fishery management in the fishery management plan. They voted to move forward with adaptive management in the spotted sea trout fishery. And included in that adaptive management framework is the caveat that any adaptive management be brought back to the commission for review prior to implementation. And lastly, for spotted sea trout, they voted to move forward with cold stun management and cold stun adaptive management. The closure that we currently have in place now actually would extend until June 30th, following a severe cold stun. And the adaptive management framework specific to cold stun allows them, in the event of a very, very severe, significant cold stun, for additional measures to be put in place. They also gave final approval to amend and adopt 8 rules. They were in kind of 3 categories. The first is simplifying pot marking requirements. The second is false albacore management. And the third is the Interstate Wildlife Violator Compact. If y'all are interested in any more of those, any more information about any of those rules, feel free to reach out and I'd be happy to talk to you about them. They also voted to write a letter of support to the Secretary of Commerce about the Secretarial Amendment 59 in regards to red snapper. And lastly, they selected their preferred management options for the Eastern Oyster Fishery Management Plan and the Hard Clam Fishery Management Plan. For Eastern Oyster, those options included establishing deep water oyster recovery areas that would not open to the mechanical harvest of oysters, linking mechanical oyster harvest management in Pamlico Sound to the division's extensive culture planning efforts, and determining the season length based on pre-season sampling of oyster resources. Implementing a rotational opening plan for mechanical oyster harvest on 10-acre culture planning site. And then regarding clams, implementing a 3-year phase out of mechanical clam harvest from public bottom. And that's my Marine Fisheries Commission update.
All right, thank you, Jesse.
Is that being in person for the Flounder SCs? Is that gonna be in person?
It will be in person, yes, sir.
I know there's hints of it being.
Yeah, we had discussed it being online potentially, but we discussed joint meetings as well, but it will be 3 separate AC meetings that are in person.
You think it'll be Washington or?
For the northern, it likely will be Manio since we're meeting in Washington for this, so kind of alternate. Although that is still subject to change based on room availability. Can I actually say one more thing? Just it's not about the Marine Fisheries Commission update. I do just want to thank everybody that came tonight and gave your comment, and especially coming prior to 6 o'clock to speak with the division staff. I know I had some good conversations with people. I'm sure Robert and McLean and other staff did as well, and we really, really appreciate that. It was mentioned that we're going to be working on Amendment 4 to the Blue Crab Fishery Management Plan, and I really, really hope that when that process starts next year, that everybody remains engaged and still comes and speaks to the division about the different options. It's incredibly helpful. That's all I have.
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
Have a second. All in favor, let it be known by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, like.
Aye.
Jamie, Missy, and Morton, thank y'all for joining.
Yeah, thanks for
Y'all
letting
take
me
care.
join.
Which I can do this. On the website. But short past mystery meetings. Pretty much go through. Just get an update and